Mexican cartels using Chinese money launderers. South African gangs fighting taxi drivers in Cape Town for the right to extort them. All of that and much more on this week's edition of Organized Crime News Weekly. Welcome back to this week's edition of Organized Crime News Weekly. This is the weekly show where we discuss the goings-on in the global criminal underworld. And once again, before I start, just a reminder to please like, share, and subscribe so we can help grow this channel. Our first story concerns a man who has only been identified as Riley B., and he has been arrested in Curacao being an island in the Caribbean that belongs to the Netherlands. And Riley B. has been extradited back to the Netherlands this past week on charges that he played a leading role in the murder of Peter de Vries. Peter de Vries was a legendary Dutch investigative journalist. He was a household name throughout the Netherlands for decades. He was murdered back in 2021 after he became involved in a criminal case involving the ruthless Dutch-Moroccan drug lord Ridouan Taghi. But back to Riley B. He is a member of the No Limit Soldiers gang of Curacao, and he has been in prison since 2014 for a shooting that occurred outside Curaçao's Hato Airport, in which 2 rivals were murdered and 7 bystanders were wounded with gunfire that came from an AK-47. Riley B. was allegedly the getaway driver in this shooting. And this comes after 4 men were convicted of de Vries' murder in June of last year. De Vries was acting as a confidant of Nabil B., who was a key witness in the trial of Ridouan Taghi, as I mentioned earlier. Taghi was convicted in February of last year after a lengthy trial that lasted several years. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for 5 murders that he ordered himself. However, he was not convicted for his role in ordering the murder of Peter de Vries, even though he is strongly suspected to have ordered it. This comes the same week as a lawyer for Taghi was arrested for allegedly passing on instructions from him to members of his group on the outside. Before his arrest in Dubai in 2019, Taghi was part of what is called the European Super Cartel, which is said to control up to a third of the cocaine being trafficked into Europe. He was a member of the Super Cartel, along with figures such as Daniel Kinahan from Ireland, Raffaele Imperiali of Italy's Camorra, Eden Gashinen from Bosnia, and Ricardo Raquelme Vega, aka El Rico, a Dutch-Chilean drug trafficker. And throughout the mid-2010s, Taghi waged a bloody war for control of the drug trade in the Netherlands, particularly Amsterdam, which saw gruesome murders such as a decapitated head being placed in front of a shisha lounge, as well as the headquarters of a news organization that covered Taghi being targeted with a rocket launcher. The most notable act that Taghi is linked to is the murder of Peter de Vries, and Riley B. is alleged to have played a leading role in this murder plot. He is thought to have carried out instructions to the shooters and getaway drivers via an encrypted phone, but it looks like Taghi's empire is vastly disintegrating. Our next story comes from Cape Town in South Africa, where a 50-year-old taxi owner named Dinga Lamoya Sinso was gunned down in the Wynberg Magistrates Court building in Cape Town. Sinso was on trial for extortion and was shot 4 times in the head on the 4th floor of the building by a lone gunman. As of now, the murder is being attributed to the Junkie Funky Kids gang, who are heavily involved in extorting taxi drivers in the town of Vrygrond in Cape Town. In South Africa, for a number of years, has had a huge problem with gangs. Cape Town is ranked as one of the most dangerous cities in the world, with murder rates comparable to those of cities in Mexico and Colombia. And there's an endless number of different gangs who are fighting for control of extortion rackets, as well as drug sales, and the Junkie Funky Kids are just one of these gangs. And these gangs have managed to infiltrate different taxi associations throughout the city, using violence to control the routes and extort money from the operators. They also often use them as fronts for other activities, such as drug trafficking, and they claim to be protecting the taxi owners from rival gangs in return for protection money. So your classic protection racket, which has been a staple of organized crime as long as it has existed. Recently, however, some taxi associations have been fighting back against the Junkie Funky Kids in a war that has seen innocent taxi drivers murdered, as well as taxi drivers even killing members of the Junkie Funky Kids. One murder that occurred was this past February when Ashley Essie Phillips, the leader of the Junkie Funky Kids, was murdered. Members of the gang believed that Cinso, the man murdered in the courthouse, had something to do with it, and that his murder was a settling of scores. And since that murder in the courthouse this past week, a girlfriend of one of the leaders of the Junkie Funky Kids, named Shireen Matthews, has been arrested and charged for this murder, and she is alleged to have incited and commanded members of the Junkie Funky Kids to carry out the murder. This is a fascinating story. It's always pretty interesting whenever someone rebels against organized crime, and it seems like these taxi owners have become some sort of a vigilante group against the gangs that have been terrorizing Cape Town for decades now. But I feel like South African gangs do not get very much attention in media relating to organized crime. But the problem, particularly concerning the gangs in the Cape Flats, is a generational struggle that affects everyday life for people all across the town every day, whether they be victims of extortion or just an innocent person being caught in a shooting. Cape Town is firmly in the grasp of these numerous gangs. Our next story concerns Balkan drug lord Darko Saric, who has been sentenced to 6 years in a Serbian court for trying to discredit government witness Nebojša Jaksovic. Jaksovic was a former member of Saric's organization who turned on him after he felt Saric had abandoned him after his arrest. Darko Saric is probably one of the most underrated figures in the international cocaine trade. He is thought to have ties to influential people in the Serbian government, and he controls a vast empire that ships multi-ton quantities of cocaine from South America into Europe. But going back to the case with the witness Jaksovic, after Jaksovic turned on him and started informing on him, Saric subsequently tried to murder Jaksovic on a number of occasions, and when that didn't work out, he tried to frame Jaksovic for a car bombing that his own men carried out in order to discredit him as a witness. And Saric gave out these orders over text messages on a phone smuggled into the prison he was incarcerated in, as he is also currently serving a 15-year prison sentence for cocaine trafficking. Also convicted in this plot were several other defendants, including a couple of police officers, along with Saric's brother Dusko, who was sentenced to 1 year, and even Saric's lawyer Dejan Lazarevich, who defended him in this trial, was convicted. Lazarevich was sentenced to 3.5 years, and he is banned from practicing law for 7 years. All defendants were convicted of trying to discredit Jaksovic, but they were acquitted of planning his murder. And now let's get to a little bit of Saric's background. He is from a tiny village in Montenegro, the tiny country next to Serbia and the Balkans that also used to be part of the former Yugoslavia. Saric got his start as a petty criminal in his teens before serving a 4-year prison sentence in the early 1990s. It is said that Saric entered the cocaine business after robbing a neighbor of his of more than 1 kilogram of gold and using this as his seed money. After spending time in Western Europe, Saric settled in Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, in the early 2000s. And this is when Saric's business really kicked off, and he made direct contacts with South American cartels such as the PCC, the Primeiro Commando Capital, the largest criminal organization in Brazil and one of the leaders in the international cocaine trade. And Saric made agreements with these South American groups to transport vast amounts of cocaine into Europe. Saric even had his own men based out of Ecuador to coordinate shipments of cocaine, such as the port of Guayaquil, which I've talked talked about previously on this channel how Ecuador has become a key transit point for cocaine being smuggled from countries such as Colombia and Peru before it heads on to Europe. One of the shipments that Sarich was responsible for was 2.7 tons of cocaine worth 5 billion euros, or $5.5 billion. That was intercepted back in October of 2009 off the coast of Uruguay. After being indicted numerous times by the Serbian authorities, Sarich voluntarily turned himself in back in March of 2014. Sarich was convicted of cocaine trafficking initially in July 2015 and was sentenced to 20 years. He successfully appealed this decision and was granted a retrial in 2018. However, he was again found guilty and was sentenced to 15 years. In July of 2020, he was convicted on money laundering charges and he was sentenced to an additional 9 years. As well as all the stuff I just mentioned, Sarich is linked to the Kovac clan of Kotor, Kotor being a village in Montenegro. The Kovac clan is a cocaine trafficking organization that since 2014 has been embroiled in a war with the Scagliari clan, also of Kotor. They used to be one organization, but back in 2014, they had a split after the Kovac allegedly stole a shipment of cocaine from a warehouse in Spain that belonged to the Scagliari. And this war has seen over 50 people murdered across Europe in the past decade and is still ongoing. As well as all the crimes Sarich has already been convicted of, he is also set to go on trial later this year for the murders of 2 Scagliari clan members that occurred in Corfu, Greece, back in July of 2020. Sarich allegedly planned these 2 murders along with Radoje Zavisar, the leader of the Kovac clan, and Veljko Belivuc, also a member of the Kovac clan, who is also a leading figure in the football hooligan scene in the city of Belgrade. Belivuc has been accused of some of the more gruesome murders that I've ever encountered in researching this stuff. He kept a house in Serbia where he brought enemies of the clan, where him and his men proceeded to torture them, decapitate them with axes, all the while filming these and taking pictures of these atrocities. He's also on trial currently with several others for the murders committed in this slaughterhouse. As far as the 2 murders in Greece that Sarich, Zavisar, and Belivuc are charged in, there's also 16 other individuals who are also charged. So Darko Sarich has got a lot more on his plate as far as criminal trials go, and it looks like he will probably never see the light of day again. All right, our next story concerns the arrest of 6 men for the murder of Vittorio Boiocchi, who was the former leader of the Curva Nord Ultra of the Inter Milan Football Club. I've talked about before how football ultras often are very much involved in criminal activity, whether it be dealing drugs in soccer stadiums, as well as controlling a lot of the concessions and extorting the parking attendants. Boiocchi was gunned down in Milan back in October 2022 at the age of 69. He had a long criminal history and spent more than a third of his life in prison. He was involved in armed robbery before becoming involved in cocaine trafficking. He had also been convicted of other offenses, such as the illegal possession of weapons, as well as kidnapping and theft. Boiocchi served 26 years in prison before he was released in 2018, where he then muscled his way into the leadership of the Curva Nord, despite being banned from the San Siro Stadium, which is the stadium that Inter Milan plays at for its home games, due to his criminal record. Boiocchi made a fortune by price gouging fellow members of the Milan Ultras on tickets, as well as extorting a cut on parking fees and burger van profits from the stadium. He was last arrested in March 2021 when he was arrested before he could carry out the kidnapping of a Milanese businessman. The 2 gunmen who are accused of Boiocchi's murder are Pietro Simoncini and Daniel D'Alessandro. They were arrested in the Calabria region of Italy and Bulgaria, respectively. Simoncini is thought to have close ties to the 'Ndrangheta in the town of Vibo Valentia. The 'Ndrangheta, as I mentioned before, are the most powerful mafia organization in Italy. They are one of the leaders of cocaine trafficking throughout the world. They're said to be worth tens of billions of dollars. Then they are very much involved in these criminal rackets occurring at these soccer stadiums, along with the ultras. The other 4 suspects that have been arrested for Boyaki's murder have already been in custody since last September for organized crime offenses. One of these men is Andrea Beretta, the former right-hand man of Boyaki, who took his place after his murder. Beretta was arrested back in September, and he has since become a cooperating witness with the government. Beretta was arrested after he was accused of killing powerful 'Ndrangheta member Antonio Bellico. Bellico was a member of the Bellico Ndrina of Rosarno, and he was their representative in Milan, as well as being in a leadership position in the Curva Nord. According to Beretta, Bellico was planning on having him murdered when the two of them came into conflict over the management of illicit businesses going on in San Siro Stadium. In September 2024, Bellico and Beretta left a gym together and got into a car. In an act that was caught on video, the car reversed before Bellico opened one of the car doors, attempting to flee the vehicle, but failing. 2 nearby witnesses who had noticed this incident came over to the car and then discovered that Bellico was dead after having been stabbed multiple times in the neck and heart by Beretta. Beretta was promptly arrested and claimed self-defense, as Bellico had supposedly pulled a gun on him in the car prior to the stabbing. But going back to the murder of Vittorio Boyaki, the Ultra leader, Beretta has admitted that he ordered the murder of Boyaki and that he paid the perpetrators 50,000 euros to carry out the hit. He said that he ordered Boyaki's murder because he wanted the top spot in the Curva Nord and he was tired of waiting his turn. So, classic case of jealousy and greed. But this story just goes to show how some of these football fan clubs have managed to morph almost into mafia-like organizations. This is also very common in Serbia. I just talked about Veljko Belivuc in the last story. And in this case, in the Milan Ultra, they were working with the 'Ndrangheta. But Beretta, the man who turned after committing these 2 murders, has been threatened repeatedly since he started to cooperate with the government, and it remains yet to be seen what kind of results his testimony will provide. Alright, our final story concerns a Chinese national living in Beaufort, Georgia, in the United States by the name of Li Pai-tan, who has been sentenced to 78 months in prison for his role in laundering money for Mexican drug cartels, most notably the Sinaloa Cartel and the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, or in English, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, better known as the CJNG. This comes after Tan and his co-accused Xiaoji Chen of Chicago pleaded guilty to these charges in October of last year. Chen was sentenced to 90 months back in December. And in recent years, Mexican cartels have increasingly relied on Chinese money launderers to deal with their ill-gotten gains. Most of the precursor chemicals that the Mexican cartels use in drugs, such as fentanyl, are imported from China, and as well as providing these precursor chemicals, Chinese criminal organizations have assisted the Mexican cartels in laundering their money from the sales of fentanyl and other drugs. And besides the Mexican drug cartels, Chinese criminal organizations have also become launderers for other criminal organizations throughout the world, such as for the 'Ndrangheta, who I mentioned in the last story, in Italy. But in this case, concerning these 2 Chinese men residing in the United States, Tan and Chen, they allegedly traveled throughout the U.S. to collect proceeds from the trafficking of drugs, primarily fentanyl and cocaine, and they both communicated and coordinated with accomplices based back in China. With the money they collected, they then wholesale purchased electronics in the United States before shipping the goods back to China. Tan and Chen were both arrested in May 2024 after law enforcement seized hundreds of thousands of dollars from Chen at locations across the U.S. Tan was arrested in South Carolina while in the middle of transporting over $197,000 in drug proceeds. But this is a trend that has been growing greatly in recent years. The Chinese have become the go-to for criminal organizations to launder their money due to the low fees that they demand in return for laundering the money. In recent years, China has also restricted the movement of capital flow out of China, and many rich Chinese individuals turn to these money launderers to move their money out of China as well. This is a trend that does not seem to be going away anytime soon, and it seems to be becoming ever more prevalent as Chinese criminal organizations consolidate their control over these global money laundering networks. All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of Organized Crime News Weekly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please tune in again next week for more thrilling stories about the global criminal underworld. Thank you so much. See you next week.